G'day everyone, the anti-theocrat yet again with yet another one. I'm not really excited about doing this one. I would like to try and keep it short. Hello Goose. But I know how much I put into this. I missed a day of recording because I was just working through this document and I only got 26 pages through the 50-something odd pages of the document. Before I felt the need to give in because they just hit that point. Shut up, Goose. I know I'm talking. He's talking to me. You can hear my voice. I do have the window open. It's a nice blowy desert day. The dust is up and the wind is up. But, you know, all you can do is put the air conditioner on. Hope it keeps the dust balanced a bit against the cool breeze. Evaporative air conditioning. So we're sucking air through a water filter, a water jacket to bring it through the house, and then you keep the windows open, and to some degree it keeps the house pressurized and limits the dust a little bit while still giving you fresh air through the house. For anyone who hasn't lived in a desert area with evaporative air conditioning. Anyway, where are we? Let's see. We'll bring up this horrible document. New South Wales Health. The case for change, integrated prevention and the response to violence, abuse and neglect in New South Wales Health. And what I've done is I will show you, I have put comments on the bits that I've highlighted. So this one says, from the people who removed all information about male victims from their website, which is something that New South Wales Health did about 2 years ago. There was a list of who it admitted that men were victims and that men could be victims on the same scale as women, essentially. That even though it was at a lesser degree than women, it was still no less important, and it listed who the potential perpetrators were, which of course would upset the feminists a little bit because, you know, women and children can't... How can they attack men? What is this, a patriarchy or not? So yes, all reference to males, the supporting male victims and any information about male victims was essentially removed from the New South Wales Health website. So, shall we move on? Let's see where this document takes us in the 26 pages that we got through. New South Wales Health recognises Aboriginal people as the First Nations people of Australia, whose land on which we now live, work, and winds and waters we all now share. We pay our respects to the Aboriginal elders, past and present, emerging. So we have to the future ones as well. We value Aboriginal history, culture, and acknowledge that in many ways it enriches the life of our nation and communities. You don't know my neighbourhood. A strength and resilience of women, children, families, and communities who have experienced violence, abuse, neglect underpins and drives this work. We acknowledge the lived experiences of all victims and survivors and hope that the resources contribute to our collective vision of all communities and families to be healthy, safe and free from violence, abuse and neglect. The first thing any Australian government needs to do is to show us how oppressed blackfellas are in this nation. I was born here, it's my nation, where are my thanks? I reserve the right to question statements made about respecting victims as I go through this document. I suspect I won't find it to be this simple. So anyway, I skipped most of the thanks here. We'll close this or it follows down the page. I skipped most of the thanks and then it's just the things, and we've got the contents page. We'll brief over the contents page. I do these documents sort of briefing over bits that I know I'm not going to be interested in because I don't have the time for all of it. If I'm looking for a specific thing, then that's what I do. Okay, the project, in this case, I have tried to go through as much of the document as possible, up to the 26 pages. So we'll see how we go. The project background. New South Wales Health is committed to strengthening its response to clients who have experienced violence, abuse and neglect. It has invested $10 million per annum from 2017-18 to improve the capacity of services to meet the need of victims, survivors of child abuse and neglect, sexual assault and domestic and family violence. To which my comment is $10 million was the figure being spent. That is to go up. That's the purpose of this document, is we had $10 million, we would like more. As part of this funding enhancement, the Ministry of Health, in partnership with local health districts, specialist health networks and New South Wales Health Pillars, has undertaken a statewide violence, abuse and neglect service redesign and planning project to produce the New South Wales Health Integrated Prevention and Response to Violence, Abuse and Neglect Framework. That's what this is. I see no bias here. You asked the feminist-run services in the field to give you a report on how things were, and they didn't see you or your money coming. Good one, is my only response to that. Okay, so we went over all that because it's pretty irrelevant. Purpose of resources. The Case for Change, Integrated Prevention and Response to Violence, Abuse and Neglect in New South Wales Health, provides a summary of key findings from the research and clinical literature that underpins the framework. Existing services and framework have a bias. They base their services on doctrines, not facts, and because they ignore known issues, they are not having an impact on the issue. Why not review all from ground up and work out if it actually is achieving any goals you may have set? Why start asking the bad thing how it can be better? Skipping ahead to the next bit I covered, the literature scan includes, oh, by the way, I can't archive this because it's a PDF document. If anyone wants to get their hands on this document, I have linked it in the low bar, but if it for any reason vanishes, and New South Wales Health and other government departments do have a tendency to vanish their documents into the archives, where they are very hard to find. I do have a copy of this and I will send it to anyone who wants to review it beyond the review I'm about to give, because I don't want you thinking that, you know, you have to take my word for how bad this document is. The literature scan includes in its resources, in this resource, considers Australia and international peer reviewed literature, grey literature, including government reports and inquiries, meta-evaluations and promising practice frameworks for integrated care, clinical literature and practice-based research. I see they tried, but who trusts peer-reviewed literature in this field in this day and age? The government reports and inquiries are questionable. As like this one, they can say we asked the bad people how the bad people could do better. Still, it seems they tried to get a wider range of data sources. It does seem that way at this point. But from this one comment. I did skip ahead because I just didn't think it was worth us covering all of that. What do we mean by violence, abuse and neglect? Again, I didn't think it important to cover all of that. You can look that up. Just about any document in this genre will have more or less the same use of the meaning, same meaning. I knew I had a word in there somewhere. Ah, it's going to be fun. Violence, abuse and neglect in Australia. Now, I only singled out a little bit of this, but I'll read the whole thing. Violence, abuse and neglect is experienced by many people around the world. In Australia, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 20 men have experienced sexual violence since the age of 15, and most people are sexually assaulted by someone they know. Violence occurs in the context of relationships or family. More than 2 million Australian women and 700,000 Australian men have experienced violence by an intimate partner since the age of 15. Now, what did I write on this one? It says, keep this in mind, right? Keep it in mind that violence often occurs in relations with families. 2 million Australian women, 700,000 men, right? 2 million women, 700,000 men. Keep that in mind, because apparently 2.5 million Australian adults experienced abuse before they were 15, and for 94% of both male and female victims, the abuse was experienced by someone known to them. Righto. Then we get this lovely big highlighted bit in the middle. In Australia, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 20 men have experienced sexual violence since the age of 15, and most people are sexually assaulted by someone they know. To which I replied, this is what they focused on. From that entire paragraph, this is what they focused on. By focusing on this, focusing this way, they can make this as a women's issue. The better figure, the one that shows how wide-ranging this is, is the figure that shows that more than 1 in 3 men who experience the same issue. So yes, they could have just said all of these people suffer this thing, but they focused on putting the women up first. Yeah, it just takes the focus away from how many people are getting this thing. How many people this is happening to. It's a very tricky little thing to select from this, just the one little bit. I mean, more than 2 million women in Australia and 700,000 Australian men. If you put this in its context, this doesn't quite weigh out as it's almost 50-50, right? It's not so far from being. You take 700,000 away from 2 million, you end up with almost a little over 1 million, right? So it's this statistically damn close to 50-50 if we look at it that way. It might be 60-40. But if 40% is how many of the cases are men, why would you try to underwrite that? Why would you? Yeah, anyway. While violence, abuse and neglect is experienced across all New South Wales communities, particular groups of people may be more likely to experience violence and abuse or to be more vulnerable to its impacts, requiring targeted health or other service responses. Now, this is lovely. This is how you write men out of the picture, because men don't need this help. Women need it more. Different people. So there's a range of people who could need it more, but it's definitely not men. And I didn't even put a comment on that. I bloody should have. The majority of victims or survivors of sexual assault, child abuse and neglect and domestic violence are women and children. So there it is. I said it. I read the first half of this, and I said this was about writing the men out, and here it is. Even though 40% of the victims thereabouts are men. We've written them out. It all happens to women and children. Why, if this is not about focusing on why, if this is not about focusing on women, would they feel the need to dismiss men so readily? One paragraph on. While figures do show more women are affected, the number of men affected would suggest there is no purpose to dismissing them in making this point. Exactly right. There's no need to dismiss men here. All this does is it tells me, right, we're 2 pages into the document and I already know what this document's going to be about, because we've already said, even though 40% of the victims are men, it doesn't fucking matter. I'm going to skip the rest of that because they don't care anyway. They, at the end of this, right, they've said geographical status and all sorts of things in here, and none of that matters. None of that fucking matters. Co-occurrence and links between forms of violence and abuse and neglect. Research on patterns of re-victimization and co-occurrence of different forms of abuse show that a single incident is often the exception rather than the norm. and that people have experienced multiple forms of violence and abuse, either concurring or over a lifetime. My comment to which is, this spits in the face of the feminist theory that men are just evil. This is an important note worthy of more respect, because what it says is repeat offending is more common than one person being assaulted one time. So there are a number of conclusions you could draw from repeat offending. And I know we're not allowed to victim blame unless it's men, and I've covered this in previous videos. But I'm going to victim blame everyone right this bloody instant. Because if you find yourself with different partners and the relationships turn abusive, can we judge from that maybe you're playing a part in your own abuse? Can we? Is it possible? So repeat offending just doesn't mean the 5% of people in the population who commit crimes are going to commit crimes, and they're going to commit them more than once. It also means that the people who are having the crimes committed against them may in part be a driving factor in why these crimes occur. Now, in my younger years, I hung out with people in slightly notorious fields. I knew drug dealers and all sorts. And drug dealers getting beaten, or the people buying from them getting beaten up on a regular basis, isn't uncommon. You don't pay your debts, they come. They come after you and they beat you up again. And in the case of drug dealers, stepping on someone else's toes, there's a whole lot of things that can get them beaten up on a regular basis. It's this sort of thing is why 5% of the population are offenders, and the rest of us are innocent parties trying to get on with life. So this is an important thing. All right, re-victimization and co-occurrence are important, but never something feminists want to talk about. I have skipped the rest of that, and I've moved to the heading of the next one and highlighted that. What do we have? Violence, abuse, and neglect has serious health impacts. Entirely possible, but how much of it is people letting their pasts rule their futures? Do we help make people victims? Are we more invested in helping victims than those moving on and making good with their lives? Are we creating excuses? Just asking. I wonder if anyone else asks. And that's what the point I'm making here is, I can ask this question, which on the face of it looks really rude. How dare I ask victims if we've helped to create the situation they find themselves in as lifelong victims? Fuck, I've been abused. I've had some really classic abuse in my life. And when I was younger, it did things like leave me in tears and leave me messed up and leave me even suicidal. But did I allow myself to be a victim? Did I allow other people to make me a victim? How much of this are we making people victims? How much does this sort of document help people to become victims? I'm asking because no one else seems to. All right, I've skipped the rest of that because it's just, who cares? The public health approach. The World Health Organization promotes a public health approach to violence built on the socio-economic model of health that recognizes violence and abuse as the result of complex interplay of individual relationships, social, cultural, and environmental factors. That sounds beautiful on top of that, doesn't it? So what did I write in my comment? I couldn't give a fuck what the WHO thinks or does. We need to burn the UN down and start again. The UN have only one gendered office, the one for women. The WHO has very specific programs and guidelines for women, and they often run the feminist narrative that men are the root cause of all evil. And that's damn true. You tell me anything at all about the WHO these days, and I'll tell you to get fucked and find a real health organisation, because they are not concerned about health. They are worried about pushing the right narratives. Seriously, nothing is more useless than the UN. They proved that with their blue helmets decades ago, and unfortunately they haven't improved. Okay, I skipped the whole trauma-informed and personal-centered care because that's not really important to where I'm going. And it wouldn't add anything anyway. The integration requires collaboration and leadership at multiple levels. To which my only comment is, we set the tone for well-paid and established management to tap the funding. Good-o. That's what that is. That's them saying we need management. Okay. Maintained up-to-date evidence-based policies and procedures that underpin service delivery and identify gaps in the knowledge base that require further research. This is under the extent and capacity of integration of context of specific... anyway, you get the idea. And as I said, that's what we're waiting for. We're waiting for them to maintain an up-to-date evidence-based set of policies and procedures that underpin service delivery and identify the gaps in the knowledge base that is required for further research. We're really waiting for that to happen. We're waiting, and I suspect this document doesn't fill that gap. Okay, benefits of integrated prevention and response. Again, I didn't really care what they think the benefits are. I just found this post at the bottom that I thought was important. Cost effectiveness and service efficiency through minimalising duplication. This seems like a good idea on the face of it, but as my comment says, this is where we don't get men's services because there exist in feminist-run women's services. That's exactly what this is about. To bring cost-effective services and efficiency, we decide which services deserve to have the funds. And those services are all feminist-run, feminist-maintained, and extremely anti-male in this country. Okay, we finally get to the introduction. Up to this, we've only been in the definitions stage, which is why I got to skip lots of it. But let's see how much of the introduction I get to skip. Skipping down, skipping... Oh, look at that. There's a whole lot of nothing in that. Okay, we got to a paragraph here. The case for change, integrated prevention and response to violence, abuse and neglect in New South Wales Health. The case for change provides a summary of key findings for the research and clinical literature that underpins the New South Wales Health Integrated Prevention and Response to Violence, Abuse and Neglect Framework. The Case for Change is a companion resource to the framework, supporting its development and implementation by the Minister of Health, the District's Specialty Health Network and New South Wales Health Pillars. So this document is meant to be the document for sourcing the information you need to decide how to run the policies, to decide how the policies are meant to look. This is that resource. And as I said, that's all we need from this part. This entire section, what we needed to know was what it actually is, and this is meant to be the companion resource. This is the one you're building the rules for how you're going to run a service or do something. You put this document beside you on the desk and you source it for your information. So the project background. I'll read this through. New South Wales Health is working to strengthen its response to victims of sexual assault, child abuse and neglect and domestic and family violence, and has invested $10 million per annum from 2017-18 to improve service capacity. As part of this funding enhancement, the Ministry of Health, in partnership with the districts... See, and this is why I don't go on reading this entire document. Nobody needs to know all this shit. And all I wrote was, when you're spending a fortune on a lovely document, repeat yourself to bulk it out, because this has already been stated earlier. So, I essentially took nothing from that. It is just more of the same. The policy context. The project is supported by an increasing interagency reform agenda being undertaken in New South Wales aimed at better supporting the needs of vulnerable children, young people and families. Recent and ongoing policy initiatives that are relevant to and consistent with the principles underpinning the development and implementation of the van services redesign include, so this is what they are going to include: New South Wales Premier's priorities: producing domestic violence, reoffending and protection of our kids. New South Wales Family Violence Blueprint for Reform. New South Wales Domestic and Family Violence Prevention and Early Prevention Strategy. The New South Wales Sexual Assault Strategy, future directions for social housing in New South Wales, Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse, New South Wales Ombudsman inquiry into the operation of the Joint Investigation Response Team, their futures matter, the new approach to child protection and family wellbeing, Aboriginal family wellbeing and violence prevention strategy, Legislative Council report, unfinished business reparations for the stolen generation in New South Wales. They can go and get fucked. Look, I don't have a problem with the stolen generations. There are people alive and living today who were of that generation. The problem is, I know one and he's a white fella. This has been made a black fella thing. It has entirely been put around the Aboriginals, but it was not about Aboriginals. This was about a whole range of different corruptions that were existing in the systems. In the case of my friend, low socio-economic family, single mother. If it hadn't been for the grandmother stepping in and saying, no, you cannot take this child, he would have been handed over to a wealthy family that was standing by ready to take him. This is not an Aboriginal issue. This was an institutional issue that needs to be addressed in that way. While we focus it on the Aboriginal people, and while we would pretend we need to give only Aboriginal people money, we're actually denying a whole lot of other people a voice. And the fact that I know someone firsthand who was in that situation who is not Aboriginal means there's got to be a shitload more of them out there. Because I only know 3 or 4 stolen generation Aboriginals. Right? So if I know quite a lot of Aboriginals, but I know few stolen generation ones. Now, if I know a hell of a lot of white fellas, and I know one who is a stolen potential, was at the edge of being part of that stolen generation, then I know there are more. Anyway, that's what they're looking to work through. Foundations overview of violence, abuse and neglect. So this is the bits where it starts to matter. The shared understanding of the nature and impact and extent of primary forms of interpersonal violence, abuse, neglect is crucial in developing consistent and comprehensive integrated responses across the health system and with partner organisations, and to improve client outcomes. And that's apparently issued by the useless World Health Organization, but it sounds nice on the face of it. To support this definition and an overview of the evidence for violence and abuse experienced by the clients accessing health services in New South Wales are below provided. So we start with child abuse and neglect. And I commented, and while I probably have questions at this time, I don't have to cover the entire document. I am specifically seeking is bias, and I will find it in other places far more clearly. So I will move over child abuse and neglect. I will skip past it wherever I can. That's my point. That's all I'm saying. Is I'm looking for where this document is wrong, and it's probably not too wrong when it comes to talking about children. There are bits I will question, obviously, because here's one. Right, you can see I skipped down the first column, come back to the second one, and I found something I actually found interesting in the section on children. Potential substance misuse, mental health problems and domestic violence are described as key risk factors for child abuse and neglect that often co-occur as part of a complex set of social and family issues. Other risk factors include economic factors, poverty, unemployment or crowded or unstable housing. Social factors, racism, discrimination, social isolation and exclusion. Community factors, dangerous, disadvantaged or socially excluded communities who have lost many community members. Parental factors, mental health, substance misuse, family domestic violence, learning difficulties, parent anger, strong belief in corporal punishment, transgender trauma and its impact on parenting, lower levels of empathy. Transgenerational, sorry, that just wouldn't come to me. Okay, child characteristics, low birth weight, special needs, behavioural problems. Family characteristics, poor relationships, large number of children, single or early parenthood. Ecological, environmental factors, violence, gambling, pervasiveness or unresolved grief, loss and trauma, previous experiences of abuse and neglect for parents or children, abuse and neglect, previous experience of abuse and neglect. And my comment being, oops, stopped short. Yes, I did, because I didn't get through the kids bit without commenting. These factors could as easily be applied to adults, male and female, because they are the most notable factors when it comes to domestic violence. Not power and control, not the patriarchy, and not men are violent animals. And that comment is dead right. This document could have just said, these are the factors most associated with domestic violence. Because they are. These things, this is the list. This is it. They could have stopped. The whole document was written there. Okay. Exposure, yeah, it's right. They're just going to go over some of that, and it's not really important to us. 2.2 is children and young people displaying or engaging in problematic or harmful sexual behaviour. So, I've skipped by this, but I found there is a strong link between problematic and harmful sexual behaviour and the child's own experience of sexual abuse or other forms of interpersonal violence. I apparently commented on this. What did I say? As this document goes on, I may find myself questioning this with relation to the increased number of children being raised by single mothers with no or little father involvement, with women raising kids without violent and mean male influences. Should the situation be getting better? For now, however, let's move on and see if we can reach that point. And that's exactly right. With women being increasingly, if not now, certainly in the decades prior, women were given custody of children at much higher degrees. Whether or not the father was violent or not didn't matter. He was expected to pay the bills while she got the kids. Should we have seen a decrease in family violence with women raising children? Should we? Interesting question. So we dig through, there's not a lot there. Second column, I did find something. Age-appropriate or normal sexual behaviour needs to be distinguished from problematic, harmful and developmentally inappropriate behaviour. That's from Kellogg and Committee on Child Abuse and Neglect. Now, I wonder if Kellogg understood this. I wonder how this fits with the new theories on gender. All right, gender realignment of 4-year-olds. How does this needs to be addressed fit with that theory, which people like New South Wales Health, they love it. Sure, why not? In this country, there is a massive increase in the number of kids being put on hormone blockers and
assisted with transition at the behest of their parents. Is that age appropriate or normal sexual behaviour? Can we distinguish it from problematic, harmful, or developmentally inappropriate behaviour? Can we? Should we be transitioning kids? I would take it from that it probably is an issue that needs to be addressed. Okay. We skipped through the rest of that. We didn't have anything of worth. Domestic and family violence. Okay. The term domestic violence usually refers to violence against an intimate partner or ex-partner, while family violence, what have I written here? On the heading I have written, here is our place to start looking. I'm noting this for the benefit of anyone following my methods. I don't have time to read every document word by word. Often I brief by reading a line from each paragraph or by reading every other paragraph. When looking for specifics, I'll move quickly to the section I expect to find the problems in. And this is that section. This is the primary section I expect to find issues. In my first line of the section I wrote, I think there are problems conflating domestic and family. Also, as this goes on, it rules out short-term or semi-permanent relationships. Domestic can include people you live with in a non-personal way, whom are not family yet, or maybe just people you live in close contact with. I'm not sure why they felt the need to make this about family. Who does it help? They go on to note that a broader definition can be used for Aboriginals and Islanders, but many young people who are not in that demographic can suffer the same. And my comment is that many people in shared housing can suffer the same way. The idea is that the Aboriginals see their families as extended. The whole community is essentially their uncles and aunts. But if you live in share housing, aren't they your extended family while you live with them? If you're being abused by someone in share housing, as I was, by a woman in shared housing, she had my mates so terrified of coming to the house that they just stopped coming. Because every time we stepped to the front door, every time I came to the front door with a mate, she'd step up to the door and demand sex from me. And I wouldn't touch her, which is why she eventually destroyed my 1952 Morris Minor and tried to get her boyfriend to beat me up. Is this not also a domestic abuse situation? So, my issue is, why differentiate between what Aboriginal people consider to be family and what the rest of us might be living in that could be considered family? Just asking the questions. While there is no single definition, the central element of domestic violence is an ongoing pattern of behaviour aimed at coercing or controlling a partner through fear, for example by using behaviour that is violent and threatening. In most cases, the violent behaviour is part of a range of tactics used to exercise power and control over women and their children, and can be both criminal and non-criminal. You can bet I had a go at this one. Power theory is a feminist narrative that didn't hold up to the studies done to support it when it was written into the Duluth model of domestic violence, and still doesn't work today. It has been weaponized here, dismissing male victims before we even acknowledge their existence. Very nice. You will note that power and control only is about women and children. Women never exercise power and control over men. Right? This is a blatant dismissal of men through the use of a feminist narrative. The Duluth model was debunked by one of its very own founders. In New South Wales, the definition of domestic and family violence commonly used in the government is any behaviour in a domestic relationship which is violent, threatening, coercive or controlling and causing a person to fear for their own or someone else's safety. It is usually manifested as a part of a pattern of controlling or coercive behaviours. Fair enough. And the point is, More men need to recognise that this as the definition of the manipulative, jealous behaviour of some women and of nagging wives. Being trapped in a relationship with an abuser, as admitted in this document, is damaging, and doing it because we don't recognise it doesn't make it less dangerous. Men need to recognise that any behaviour in a domestic relationship which is violent, threatening, coercive or controlling and causes the person to fear for their or someone else's safety is an abuse. That is domestic abuse if it's in your home. We have to stand up and recognise that. We have to start reporting it. The only way we will make the changes that are necessary to these things is if we stand up and have ourselves counted. And I'm one of those people who wasn't counted. So I know why we don't get counted. It's time we did. Okay, next point. Sexual assault or other sexually abusive behaviour, including reproductive coercion, contraceptive sabotage, or unwanted or forced pregnancies or terminations. Okay, being deprived of sex or forced to perform unwanted acts with a threat of further consequences if you don't perform in certain ways against your will is, by this description, abuse. Not acts not uncommon to women. Exactly. How many of the guys out there have been refused sex on the basis that a woman wanted something specific from him? How often have men been the subject of losing a child because she got it terminated because she decided she was just pissed off with you? I'm guessing that happened because the contraceptive sabotage part of this was the only concern my mother had in informing me that when she discovered I was sexually active at the age of 15, she informed me that I'd better be having safe sex. And later on, she went on to explain what this was. That was my entire sex education from my mother. Better be having safe sex. So, I think she was just too riled up to have any further discussion. But yes, her big concern was that the girl I was going out with would try to trap me into a relationship by getting pregnant. My mother didn't know that we'd actually come up with our own methods for dealing with that not happening, but that was her concern. How many men have been in that situation? I actually suspect one of my mates ended up with a third child because his wife deliberately didn't take the pill. Because he didn't want a third child. They'd agreed not to have a third child. And she ended up having the third child, and apparently it was just because the pill didn't work. And I liked his wife. They're divorced a long time ago, so here I've lost contact with them a bit. But I liked his wife. She was a nice person, but I suspect that this was something she did to him, which means she abused him. We need to start standing up, guys. Emotional or psychological abuse includes verbal abuse and threats of violence. And all I've written here is nagging. Hello. How many decades, how many eons, how many generations of nagging wife jokes, cartoons and others? Fucking shit. My wife got me to buy a cheap-ass chair. I'm going to buy a good one, I tell you. How many eons of nagging wife jokes does there have to be before we realise that men are being emotionally and psychologically abused all the time? And trust me, I've been through the nagging thing with a partner, and it really fucking tears you asunder. It can mess you up big time. Had I not just stood up and said, I'm not taking this anymore, anything you say to me, I will feed back to you likewise, we may never have got past that stage. So, you know, I was a mess at that time in that relationship. I actually walked out one day with a bag packed and realised, after I was already walking down a highway, realised where I was heading, what I was doing, and that I had no plans, goals, or money to support myself once I got out of that household. So I had to turn around and head back, and this is how men get abused. This is how it goes on repeating. And had I not finally stood up and said, I'm not taking this fucking nagging shit all the time, every little fucking affront becomes a point of anger for someone who then nags you for fucking half an hour to an hour about it, while all you're trying to do is escape it because you've got the fucking point. It rips you apart emotionally. Got to start fucking up, standing up for ourselves, guys. We've got to start noting these things. And I'm guilty too. I'm not saying I'm not bloody part of this problem. I'm definitely part of this problem. Kidnapping or deprivation of liberty, as well as unreasonable prevention of other persons from making or keeping connections with his or her family or kin. My comment, as someone really needs to test the family courts on this one. By involving themselves in family matters, do they by extension make themselves family, and do they not commit this form of abuse when depriving a parent of access to children? Maybe you could apply for a restraining order against the family courts. I wish I had the money to spare for testing these ideas. What can I say? Damage to property, irrespective of whether the victim owns the property. Thrown plates, anyone? Alright, a plate thrown at you in anger, hits the wall, puts a hole in the wall, lands on some ornaments on the shelf, wipes them out, destroys half of them. Doesn't this fit into that? And who do we suspect throws plates more often? Guys, we've got to get our act together. Seriously, the feminists have written all of this in for us to use. We have to start fucking using it. They thought this stuff only applied to women. They've really gone out of their way to describe anything they think a man might do to a woman and make it a women's issue. The point they've missed is it's not. And we could be using this stuff back against them. You watch how fast they reform this shit when men start to stand up against the nagging behaviour of wives that's destroying them emotionally, or the thrown plate, or the jealous rampages out of the house and running around the neighbourhood, so you have to hunt them down and find them and be all apologetic and for whatever the fucking affront they decided to get upset about. I've been in that one too, don't worry. When do we start putting this measure to the test against them? The National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Their Children identifies domestic violence. Note this, won't you? We'll just read this. The National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Their Children, 2010 to 22, identifies domestic and family violence and sexual assault as gendered crimes that have an unequal impact on women and are more pervasive forms of violence experienced by women in Australia. Note the bias, women and children, and this was specifically a national plan for women and children. Nobody else was looked at, and the nobody else looked at was men and boys. None of the listed acts remains outside the ability of women. That's very true. In this list of things that happen, right? Stalking. I actually have highlighted stalking in the past. I've had female stalkers. I call them Klingons because a female stalker sees herself as having a right to you and your life. And she will install herself in your life and you can't get rid of the fuckers. They just won't go. I took one of my stalkers for a high-speed drive around a narrow seaside cliff road. Extremely high speed, extremely narrow, and extremely cliff. I could have killed the two of us. Luckily, my driving skills are up to it, but I took her on that drive deliberately. I dropped her back at her house. I left, and I knew the next day she went and reported my driving to my parents. They held it against me for a long time that I'd taken this woman on this very dangerous drive around this cliff. She'd made such a big hoo-ha about it to them that it was obviously life and death. How dare I? Except that for the next 6 months, she clung on to my father. And it wasn't until my mother got sick of it that my mother told her to fuck off. And at that point, my parents realised what I had done. And they apologised to me later on for having comes down so hard on me for this driving offence. Because they realised all I was doing was getting rid of a Klingon. Too bad for Dad that he had to put up with her. Yes, none of these things are outside the scope of what women can and will do. But this was the plan to reduce violence against women and children. Only women and children. Everything in this says that this list, right, this being at the bottom, this being tagged on, and oh yeah, I made the whole Klingon thing in the comments, so I didn't need to rant about it. It was already there. This being tagged on the bottom means that all of these points above, the behaviours that may constitute domestic and family violence, include this list is about things men do to women. That's why this note is tagged on the bottom. This is an absolute dismissal of men. While national and international evidence and data acknowledge a small proportion, I think we worked it out, it was about 40% in terms of sexual abuse, are victims of domestic and family violence and sexual assault. No, there will be no mentions of underreporting. Most people who experience this kind of violence are women in their homes and at the hands of men. My comment to which is, dismissed a second time, and that's dead right. Up here, we dismissed men entirely from any of these factors that have to do with family and domestic violence. So this is just a second dismissal. This says, yeah, okay, so it does happen to men, but it's not important. Note this stands contrary to the document's own opening pages before it changed the focus to women. Exactly fucking right. In the start, they named numbers of men and women and said, you know, it happens to men as well. And then twice in 2 paragraphs, one after the other, they dismissed men. Clean out of the fucking system. New South Wales recognises that children's exposure to domestic and family violence constitutes maltreatment. My comment, more than one paragraph denying men wasn't needed. Yes, that men exist wasn't needed. Move on. We spent an entire section on children, but we'll go back to them rather than waste another word on men. Exactly. We put 2 paragraphs together dismissing men. Now we're going to change the subject to children, because children's an easy subject to change to. Everyone wants to hear about children. Nobody wants to hear about men. So this is an easy switch to get men out of the discussion. We dismissed them twice. We changed to an easy subject, dismissing men, wiping them off the face of the planet. Not important. The 2016 ABS Personal Safety Security Survey found that in Australia, since the age of 15, women were much more likely to experience all forms of violence from a partner, an intimate partner, than men. And we're back to dismissing men. 3/4 of victims, survivors of intimate partner violence in Australia are women, whereas 1/4, a third to a quarter is not that huge a jump, you know, of victim survivors of this violence are men. A third to a quarter is not that massive a jump, and I've made this point before. Men are not just an insignificant number of these people cited. The document cites it themselves time and time again. But because it is less, they're willing to just say, fuck the men. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 13 men experience violence by an intimate partner. I think there could be a case of underreporting. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 14 men experience violence by an intimate partner. Now, do you want me to read all these? 1 in 11 women and 1 in 83 men experience sexual violence by an intimate partner. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men reported experience of emotional abuse by a current and or previous partner since the age of 15. Right. I'll go to the ABS survey, the heading. A self-reporting survey, but the ABS does offer reasonable statistics to work from. Presentation of those statistics is often the problem. Shall we look and see? Now you've just heard me read them. Open with a dismissal of men's issues, and that's exactly what I said as we were reading. Okay. I wonder if we find out if there is any underreporting noted here with the ABS. Still underreporting is not I don't know what I was writing there. Still underreporting or not, we opened with men don't matter, meaning with the around 1 in 5 men mentioned, we can be ignored. So yeah, now I get it. Yes, even though we've done this, we opened with the dismissal, so don't worry about it. Underreporting anyone? I think we also suffered that problem. I noted earlier that men don't recognise their abuse. The situation is still one of dismissal first, and even putting the women first each time highlights the fact that this is a women's issue. If I was a psychologist, I may notice something like this and think there was a reason why I was being led this way. In fact, if I was anyone with a critical, any sort of critical thinking capacity. Almost 50%, statistically near enough to remember this is, but remember this is mostly about women. Okay. This may depend on definitions and the male propensity to just take and enjoy whatever sex they can get, however it comes. So yes, unfortunately we men like to dip a dick, and sometimes when we're forced into positions that we'd rather not be in, we're just happy to have had the chance to dip our dick, because that's how we're driven. It's an unfortunate part of our genetics that makes us very gynocentric, and unfortunately the reason for male feminists existing is the very issue of wanting to dip your dick. Okay, this one's definitely subject to underreporting. Men are not as sensitive to the methods or harms or forms of abuse. Men will suffer emotional abuse far longer with less complaint. It is my issue with getting men to recognise what seems to be minor affront more often. Until we do that, we'll not be recognised in statistics like this, and will be dismissed. That's right. That's the fact that we men just don't understand that being nagged is a form of abuse. We don't really see the plate being thrown at us for some minor affront as a situation of physical abuse which should be reported. Possible attempted homicide, really. Plate hits you in the head, it could kill you. Okay, I'm going to have to take a quick break. I'll open a second part of this shortly. So, hold music, I think, might be in order. I've got a 4-year-old bothering me, and if I don't stop and talk to him, he'll only be back
For anyone wondering what it means to whistle tunelessly, here's some hold music. And that's about it. Okay, sorry about that, but I am an at-home father, and I do have that sort of problem going on around me. You know, the problem of brats. I raised them, so I know they're brats. You can't have a go at me about calling them brat. Okay, in the most recent physical assault by a male in the last 10... In most recent physical assault by males in the last 10 years, that's nice for them to focus there, women are most likely to be physically assaulted by a male they knew, and the location of the incident to be most likely to be in their homes. Men were most likely to be physically assaulted by a male stranger, and the location of the incident most likely to be either a place of entertainment or recreation venue, or outside location. What did I write on this one? The focus on male perpetrators, no mention of female perpetrators or who the victims are. In 2019, more children were killed by their mothers than by their fathers, but this is again focusing the blame on men and taking away all responsibility from women. It is true that men are more often violated, and men the violators, but this does nothing to excuse lesbian relations being statistically more violent, which is factually true. There are plenty of statistics to show. But I just realised something else here that I didn't jot down the first time. And maybe I was just trying to stay brief, and who cares about brief? This video is already long enough. Shit, it is long, isn't it? This one's a whole 2 minutes. Okay. It's true that males are more often physically assaulted by strangers in outside locations, but males are statistically more likely to be assaulted full stop by absolutely anybody, which makes this a real fudge of the figures. Because if they focused this on in the home, it would probably look quite similar. I don't know. But by adding outside locations to the victims of physical, and again, they've put women at the top, yet men are the most assaulted. So, you know, where are we drawing our conclusions here? But by putting all of it together when you talk about the men, it's sort of without noting the subsequent fact that more assaults are committed against men entirely overall, massively more than women. You're undermining the instances of it happening inside a domestic situation. That's what this does. By not noting that men are statistically assaulted far more often than women, because you could have put that in there. You'd say, right, women are assaulted at this rate and men are assaulted at this rate, and that breaks down in this way. By presenting it this way, you're essentially falsifying the figures. This is a fudge. This is incorrect. This is blatant misrepresentation of the situation. 1 in 9, 11%, or 2 million Australians witnessed violence towards their mother or a partner by a partner before the age of 15, and 1 in 22 witnessed violence towards their father and partner before the age of 15, to which I commented. So 50%, half as many saw their father assaulted. That's pretty high for a group you say is assaulted far less by their female counterpart, the group you took efforts to dismiss. I'm starting to question the accuracy of the figures you've presented. Oh, do I need to remind everyone that in the prevalence of repeat offenders that the prevalence of repeat offenders is considered the norm. Reading these statistics like this could have you thinking that each of these occurrences happened alone and was perpetrated by separate individuals.
a trap often used by feminists. Not saying this was deliberate here, but... And I think I'm changing my mind. I think this is deliberate because of this. Because this is such a clear, misleading statement, clearly misleading statement, that this must also have been put in the same way. That this is deliberately misleading. It deliberately underwrites what's happening to men and fathers. And again, underreporting, not quite understanding. I bet no kid looks at their father being nagged to the point of suicide and thinks that he's being abused. I just see mum angry at dad because, you know, dad must have done something to deserve it. I'd lay bets on that. 50% of Australian women who were caring for children while experiencing violence from a current partner reported that their children either heard or saw the violence, self-reporting. For women who reported experiencing violence from a previous partner, the rates were higher, with an estimated 68%. Okay, so she dragged the kid to daddy, or daddy had to come to the door to pick up the kid, and mummy abused dad at the front door. And yeah, it got rough because mummy was being utter bitch. Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry, maybe I'm seeing this in a way I'm not meant to see it. Of women who had children in their care at the time of experiencing violence reported that the children saw or heard the violence. So self-reporting, good-o. There's no vested interest in this at all, is there? Nearly half of women who have experienced violence by previous partners who were pregnant during the relationship experienced violence from their partner while pregnant. Highlights this violence as double-intentioned, were perpetrators' main aim at physical violence of their partner's abdomen. God, get it out, boy. Genitals or breasts, so that abuse is both the mother and the child. Okay, I do question that quite heavily. But let's have a look at what I wrote, shall we? Where were we here? No, we were up more, weren't we? No, we were there. Okay. This one is very deceptive. I've seen this done before now. First, it makes this about all pregnant women, all mothers. It is something women are more inclined to be doing, as men can't get pregnant and are less inclined to be an at-home parent caring for children, which I am, so I have a different view on these things. This statistic being used seems to be more about tugging heartstrings or presenting useful information, because it's about pregnant women, obviously. Because pregnant women do no wrong either. Okay, this simply follows the previous point with more of the same. I'll rephrase this a little. 48% of women who were assaulted while pregnant were hit in places that people hit other people when punches are thrown face on. The suggestion that every case in which this happens is a deliberate attempt to hurt in the selected places due to the person being pregnant may be overstretching the truth. I don't think people who hit other people do so rationally. The people who present this information, on the other hand, seem to think that's exactly what's going on. If they don't believe it, the question is, are they presenting the lie knowing it's a deception? This is yet again about tugging heartstrings, not about presenting well-balanced truths. And yes, look, I've been in fights. I'm a guy. We do that. Admittedly, I'm very good at avoiding them. Have all my life been pretty good at avoiding them. But sometimes people just want to fight you. When you are hit in the front. If you were hitting a man, you would hit him in the abdomen, the genitals, or the breasts. Actually, less often going for the genitals, and I'm surprised that this is something that even showed here. I'm just, maybe in some cases the genitals are the target, and maybe this is the few of these men who do this, or people who do this, because women love to go for the genitals when they fight with you. Men are more sensitive about the genitals. Wonder why? I don't know. Maybe ours is easier to target with a kick. If you kick a woman there, it's going to hurt as much. But for some reason, they don't seem to think. Oh, maybe it's this privilege thing. Nobody's going to hit me, so nobody's going to hit me in the twat. Whereas a man, his genitals are free. They're a target for everyone. I don't get it, but maybe there are a few cases in which women are targeted for the fact they are pregnant because, well, let's face it, we mentioned it earlier in this document. The idea that someone could have messed with contraceptives or something in order to trap someone or abuse someone. Maybe she did that to the guy, and maybe he has just so much anger over the situation that he doesn't know how to express it. There's no way out for him. He's going to be trapped paying for a kid for 18 years. Shit, the way the government's going, they have us paying for him for 25. They're pushing for that already. Maybe that's just something he can't get over. Maybe that's an anger that's just so deep in his system that he thinks, I'm going to punch you in the twat. I don't know. I really don't understand how a man would hit someone in the genitals. Shit, for all I know, this is more likely to be self-abuse to try and prove to medical professionals that he hit me in the twat. Because like I've said, men are more sensitive about being hit there. So, I don't know. And again, we're talking about small numbers of people. Righto. Further research highlights that in Australia, for 8 of 20 hospitalisations for female assault victims, and for 1 in 20 hospitalisations for male victims, a spouse or domestic partner was the perpetrator. It's not actually a big thing, is it? What do I write? This is a tricky one because it already notes the possibility of incorrect data. It openly states where the perpetrator was identified. This tells us that in many instances they are not. It may even be that men are less inclined to name their partner as the perpetrator. Without presenting the number of people who don't report on which gender reports less often, this figure is nearing on meaningless. Its only benefit in existing is to prove to us one more instance in which women are worse off. Dead right. Geez, I was on the ball yesterday when I did this. That's right, yes. Unless you can tell us how many people didn't report and which genders those people who didn't report may be, this really is just a fudge pie in the sky figure. I mean, has no meaning except showing that women are worse off. 4 in 5 victims of intimate partner homicide were female, and 1 in 5 victims of intimate partner homicide were male in the 2 years from mid-2012 to 2014. The figure is one that can be hard to refute due to the fact that the law, police and news outlets have a history of not recording crimes committed by women in the home as domestic violence. Lucky for us, here in Australia, we have a group keeping a more accurate records than many that have been relied on here. The figure offered doesn't in any way represent the figure presented by DVAA, who show 38 women, 18 children and 28 men were killed in 2019. Now, with the majority of the children killed by women. In the first months of 2020, they show 1 man and 1 woman already killed in domestic violence. DVAA, as you may gather, also records the killer's agenda, which tells us more about the crimes than this simple victim figure. And that's dead right. If we don't know who committed the crimes, it's very difficult to make this gendered argument that they keep making. but they do. And as stated and as recorded with these with DVAA, 18 children were killed last year, and of those 18, a staggering majority were killed by their mothers or a female relative. It's just a really bad year for women. But it's not the only year. The women quite often top the charts. I'll give you a little fact about what the findings of DVAA have been. In the years where, in any year, and this isn't just DVAA, I've seen this other places where this research has actually been done as opposed to just being quickly stolen from biased sources or what have you, out of context, maybe. Men quite often kill more than one child at a time, whereas women will more often kill one, maybe two children. Men kill more. So the statistics on the homicides sometimes show men killed more, but fewer men killed. But they almost always show more women killed, sometimes fewer children. So it's an odd one when you look into the statistics, because there is so much going on that isn't seen when you don't present the figures about the perpetrators as well. Essentially, we can say that in most years, more women kill more children than men. Even in the years where men kill more children, more women still kill more children. There was more to that comment. It was hidden away from me. Now, where is it? Here we go. With the majority of the children killed by women, which tells us more about the crimes. No, there wasn't. Okay. Intimate partner violence contributes more to the burden of disease of adult women and in their productive age than any other risk factor. It contributes to an estimated 5.1% of burden for women age 18 to 44 years. This comment's going to be a simple one. Men? Anyone? Does it have any effect on men? I recently came across some figures from the US showing how many men were recorded as having committed suicide due to domestic issues. It was massively more than for women. Does anyone think this doesn't affect men? Truly, I would love to bring up this graph that I saw, but I'm not going digging for it at this point. I'm trying to cover this document without getting too dug down in the facts and figures. But men kill themselves more often, full stop. But nobody seems interested in why men are killing themselves. When we look at suicide in Australia, more and more they turn towards the difficulties of women and children, even though the staggering the sheer number of men committing suicide should make them the primary focus. It's like this document just writes men out of the system. And what is happening is we're not looking at the reasons why, because we're just trying to ignore men. We're not looking at the reasons why men are doing this. And when people are looking at the reasons, what they are finding is domestic situations are very often the driving causes. It is wives driving their men to suicide. Maybe it also has things to do with financial problems and a whole lot of other things. But the truth is that the domestic situations these men are in seems to have an effect on their mental illness, or illness in general. Who knows what other illnesses are caused by that nagging bitch who just won't get off your back? Seriously. While male-to-female partner violence is by far the largest category of domestic and family violence, other patterns of violence occur. Comment is, others? Bets are on that they don't mean men. that people, while the data is limited, emerging evidence indicates that people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex, that means gay, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and fucktards, experience violence from partners in similar rates to those on in heterosexual relationships. And my comment is spot on. And by recording the figure this way, you get to ignore the studies that have shown that in these relationships, lesbians are recorded as the most violent, outstripping male on female and gay men by percentage, where gay men are the least violent. If you clump all the LGBTQI together, then the lesbians balance out the gays so that it comes out about the same. But it's wrong. And it's a fucking real sticking point for the feminists who put these things together, which is why they present in this way, and they don't break it down to show that lesbians are more violent. You are more likely to see this presentation than a breakdown. But did I say that this wouldn't be about those others being men? Anyone note the missing stuff? Domestic and family violence also occurs against other family members, such as, by the way, these are male and female people. Right? Just noting that. Domestic and family violence also occurs against other family members, such as elders or extended family. These types of violence may be harder to identify, and victims may find it more difficult to disclose violence and to access services. More difficult than men? Men who may feel trapped in a marital relationship or by kids? Just asking the question. But this also speaks to me in another way, because 2 odd years ago, had you been looking at the website for New South Wales Health and you'd gone to the male victims of domestic violence page, which I tell you what is fucking hard to find. I don't even know if it exists anymore, but it used to exist. And about 2 years ago, it stated that the types of violence that were common to men were quite often from elders or extended family. That's right. They were actually listed as people who could abuse men. Interesting stuff. But you won't find any of that on New South Wales Health's website anymore. It's all gone. There is also evidence that female-to-male violence does occur. Whoa! Oh, hang on. Oh, shit, that was a shock. However, the nature and consequences of women's violence is commonly different to men's violence towards women when comparing male and female perpetrated violence. The violence women experience is more severe, more frequent, and women are more likely to be seriously injured and to die at the hands of a male partner. Did anyone see that? Did anyone see that? We can call this one bullshit. Because firstly, the rate at which men use their fists compared to women using weapons equalises the level of violence in the situations. And this is fucking true. Women are statistically more likely to pick up a weapon and use a weapon against a man, whereas a man is more likely to use his upper body strength. Now, which do you think does more damage, the fucking knife or the fist? So, these statistics are heavily fudged, and I question them every time they're fucking used. How did they come to these conclusions? What did they miss? It is also less likely for men to seek medical help, something known in all other fields of medicine, but conveniently forgotten in domestic violence cases. Lastly, as I have covered before, this is a known bias towards reporting female on male domestic violence as domestic violence, and numbers show when applied to all situations that the difference is not as significant as these studies make out. And this is all fucking true, right? We know that men underreport. Even a slash to the arm by a knife will be patched up at home rather than taken to a hospital. We know that men won't name their partner as a person who did it as often because they don't want to get her in trouble. We're fucking gynocentric. We don't want to get her in trouble. We're less likely to get men. And again, all other areas of medicine know that men are less likely to seek help. Every other fucking field of medicine will tell you that men are less likely to seek help. The domestic violence, not a fucking word. Not one single fucking word through the whole start of this document where they could have addressed men, where they dismissed men. Did they say men underreport? Not fucking once. And as to the bias in reporting, yes, if you don't call it domestic violence, then it doesn't get recorded in these statistics as domestic violence. And again, this is a World Health Organization, so I really don't give a fuck what they say anyway. In addition, men are more likely to use violence instrumentally to dominate, control, injure, terrorize, and instill fear in their partner. And this violence often escalates if the partner uses violence in self-defense or they experience some loss of control of their partner, as such as separation. This is the women never caused nothing clause. She only hit him because he hit her. It was self-defense. He had no reason at all to hit her, not even in self-defense. It also includes the feminist narrative that this is about control, and that's just fucking bullshit. That was proven. I've said it already just running through this document. You can go to the wiki page, the Duluth model, look it up. Duluth, one of the founders, it was essentially founded by two people, a man and a woman. The man, he stuck to his guns. He was going to fucking white knight this shit to the hell, till hell froze over. But the woman in question was openly stated that they did research and studies when they were putting this together, and they could not prove that power or control had anything at all to do with domestic violence, or it was so insignificant it wasn't worth recording. The reason we have this narrative is, as she says in her own words, we went on and wrote it anyway, because they knew what they wanted and they wrote the doctrine regardless of whether they could make it stick with the evidence. So, yes, this is not just about women never did nothing. This is also, men only do it because they want to dominate and control. And it's all fucking bullshit. Skipping the next bit because it's just more of the same bullshit. Empirical research clearly demonstrates that there are underlying individual, community and social determinants of domestic and family violence, and thus that this violence is preventable. The single most common driver of domestic and family violence is inequality of power between men and women, expressions of gender inequality that are the drivers of violence against women, and critical to address in preventing gender-based violence, including condoning violence against women. Who the fuck doesn't know that? Men control of decision-making and limits to women's independence in public and private life. Yeah, because no woman's ever done that. Rigid gender roles and stereotyped constructions of masculinity and femininity. Male peer relationships that emphasize aggression and disrespect towards women. Go fuck yourself. From Our Watch et al. Now, I'm going to go to the comment. What did I write? Absolute feminist hogwash. Spot on, bloke. You really hit it hard with this one. This is basically the Duluth model, and it was a failure before it was produced. One of the founders of the document herself said, and I may paraphrase here, "We couldn't find evidence to support our aims, so we went along and made it up anyway." This is so well known that it is in the wiki entry, Wikipedia, just for anyone who's looking on one of those rational wikis or one of those other fucking way out left wikis that, or even Conservapedia or some shit. Don't look there for anything. In fact, don't even look at Wikipedia. But on this one, it does have a quote from this woman, from the wiki entry on the topic. Our watch, by the way, is cited for the information, and we know they are a male-hating feminist organisation with a clear bias. They fucking are. Our Watch are one of the most militant organisations, man-hating militant organisations in Australia. Their entire goal, as with the collapsed White Knight organisation, White Spleen, I don't know, White Arsehole, I don't know what they were called, White Ribbon, that was them. Yeah, as with them, everything was this power against women narrative, and not one word of this condoning of violence against women. Fucking who doesn't do it? Come on. And it's flogged to us on television and advertising. It's every fucking where. We never condone violence against men, but by fuck are we busy condoning it against women. Men's control of decision making and limits to women's independence in public and private life, because no fucking woman has ever tried to make a man in the image she wants to see him. They write this in their own fucking documents. Oh, I married this guy because he was near enough to what I wanted, and I'm hoping I can change him for the better. Go fuck yourselves. Rigid gender roles and stereotypes, constructions of masculinity and femininity. My only reply to that was, there is no problem with the stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. There are people who fit them very nicely, thank you. You would just like to have us all the same, but unfortunately our biology, the very genetics that we are based on, do not allow for that. There will be people who fit the stereotype, and there will be people on the algorithm, the chart that fall all the way in between. I, for one, am a polyamorous man in a relationship with 2 women, an at-home father raising my 2 sons. I've been doing that for 22 years. But unlike my mother, I couldn't iron and watch daytime television. I started a business. I did little jobs on the side. I've done a heap of things. I've volunteered for something like 20-odd organisations, and even upheld those organisations in order to provide them for my community. I put my family in debt buying out the local cinema so that I could keep it open for my community. I didn't do the ironing and watch daytime television like my mother did. I do not fall in these rigid gender roles, and yet I know that people do, and it is not a problem. Male peer relations that emphasise aggression and disrespect towards women. Go fuck yourself. It is more often the case these days that we will see women patting each other on the back for the way they have disrespected or emphasised aggression against men. Daytime television programs with women sitting around going, "Oh, you know, I want another kid. Should I just poke holes into condoms? Or, I've married this man, but you know, I'm fucking around with someone else on the side because, you know, he goes to work all day and I get bored." No. Just fuck off. Just fuck off. Sexual assault. Apparently I didn't feel this was a... he came back anyway. You just can't win. Anyway, give me a couple of seconds. Here we go. A couple of seconds. And I'm back. Okay, sorry about that. I had to take a quick break. The postie showed up at the door with a parcel. Okay, let's see. Sexual assault. I've skipped a lot of this at the start. It's all pretty much of the same. Sexual assault is more likely to be perpetrated by someone known to the victim. Yeah, okay. The breakdown on that is pointless, and again, it's probably just to
highlight how much more women are affected. Further research shows that the vast majority, approximately 95% of perpetrators of sexual assault against both male and female victims are male. Let's lead with this point. In every other point, it hasn't been a problem to give figures for women first, then men. In this instance, we go straight to an overall figure. And again, we haven't mentioned underreporting, but I'll not deny that men are more violent or just reported for violence more often. I can't tell you which one of these holds more truth, and I don't know of any studies that show any of these figures in their full light. However, put it all in the same basket, blame men. Doing this takes the heat off women for the number of kids they harm and kill each year. Last year in Australia, women killed far more children than men, not the first time. And when women top the list, it isn't generally by very much. When men top the list, it isn't generally by very much. You may never see it in one of these studies. You'll see this instead. Toss it all together and blame men. Again, this is how we write men out of the situation. We don't have to worry about male victims because men are the ones doing it. Did we also mention that the most violent relationships are lesbian? No man or men are involved in those situations. So yes, I'm not saying that men don't commit more of these crimes. I'm just saying we are not getting the full picture here. A woman who has been physically abused by a partner and who has also experienced forced sexual activity is more than 7 times more likely than other abused women to be killed. Okay, so the more abusive the person doing the abusing, the more likely they are to also be the person who does the killing. Now, why did this have to be about women? Couldn't you have said this about men as well? That the more abusive the abuser is, the more likely it is that the abused will be killed. No, we had to focus on women. Okay, I've got a real problem with this next one, and I haven't highlighted the bit I have a problem with, but I'm going to read it to you. Between 4 and 26.8% of Australian females and 1.4 and 16% of Australian males. Note that's only half of the number of women. It is not a statistical non-existence. It's not balanced into non-existence. It actually happens apparently at about half the rate. Have experienced child sexual abuse. I do not know why this exists. It says here, variance depends on methodology, including age and definition of abuse. The variance is so fucking huge, it makes this unworthy of even reporting. Absolutely fucking unworthy. 4 to 26.8%. That level of variance in the statistics, I'll tell you what, it throws a fucking lot of doubt on the way that these reports that we're being presented figures from are done. If they can come up with this level of variance and even report it in this, then how much level of variance is in all these other reports that are being reported as a solid factual? This report said this, but what about the other report down the road that said something different? Why would you even put it in? The sexual abuse of boys is more common than generally believed. And I'm dumbfounded that that sentence exists in this report. I really am. And in comparison to girls, boys are more likely to be assaulted by siblings or other boys in an institutional setting. Okay, that's just the more likely, but I'm wondering how often underreporting happens.
And I have my reasons. But all I've written in comment to this, and yet we struggle to talk about male victims. I probably put my comment on the next one, which is sibling sexual abuse is more prevalent than other types of intrafamilial sexual abuse. And yet, this document has gone to great lengths to make this about men. Yet, with siblings. So children fucking around with children, apparently, is more often the case. What did I write in comment to this one? You know, I never thought I'd talk about my female cousins who like to play strip poker with their male cousins, because my younger brother as well was part of this, who was too young to understand the game. Happened on a few visits. When I did bring it up, only last year actually, my mother said she knew. She reminded me that in doing so, she reminded me that nobody talks about these things that happen to boys. We still struggle to talk about male victims. Yes, when I was a teenager, there were a few occasions we went to visit some people who I'm assured were not the cousins I thought my memory told they were. So maybe I've got trauma and I've hidden some facts about it. I thought it was a different set of cousins, but I'm assured that this actually happened, and it was two females. It was normally, my recollection is it was a cousin and a friend of a cousin, and when we visited, they would get me and my younger brother into games of strip poker. Neither of us had we were young enough, neither of us had any fucking idea how to play poker. So this was a game about getting us naked. This was not a game about strip poker or poker. Right, this was just about getting two young boys naked. And nobody, till last year, brought this shit up and discussed it. When I mentioned this in reference to something else to my mother, she said, "Oh yeah, I remember that." This undermines all of this fucking shit. How often do we just not talk about this? I'm in my 50s, and last year I brought this up with my mother. Last year. And my mother said, "Yeah, I know." What does that mean? I was under the age of 10. So my mother has known for 40 years, and I don't blame my mother for not talking about this. I'm just saying this is the way society works. And me and my mother were of an age where you just didn't discuss these things. Or you didn't discuss them if it didn't happen to your daughter. 40 fucking years, more than 40 years probably, we haven't talked about this. Nobody's brought it up. Nobody's even presented it as something that may have happened to anyone. And I brought it up in relation to something else going on in a conversation. And my mother said, "Yeah, I remember that." These things shit me off, because so many of the situations that they say, "Oh, men do these things," I have been in these situations where women did them. I've got a note at this point that my parents were the sorts of parents who allowed me to watch documentaries on the national broadcaster, and I wasn't allowed to watch morning cartoons and those sorts of things. My father worked in television. He hated the medium, especially the commercial medium. He worked in the public public broadcaster. So, I was kept from a lot of the social references that a lot of my peers had. I didn't have those television references that everyone else had in their lives when I went to school. I was always a little bit on the outside. In fact, sometimes I was very on the outside. In my later high school years, my only friends were two girls who were also outsiders. So I've been the outsider a lot. And because of that, I haven't always been the brightest. Look, before my years of shared accommodation and drugs and all the rest of those fucking things that woke me up to the realities of life, I was probably just a little bit too much protected, and a lot of these things happened to me. I didn't even know these things could happen to me. Right? I was abused by women in my late teens because who the fuck ever told me that I could be abused by women or what my response to that should be? I knew what I should do when men did it. Get pissed off with this stuff because I'm not a fucking victim. I don't like discussing these things. I don't think it's relevant to discuss these things. My life has moved on so fucking much from those days. But these things happened to boys. They happened to me when I was a boy. And we're not allowed to discuss them. And I don't want to discuss them, making me part of the problem. Because I don't want to discuss mine. I tell you these things because it's the only way I can show just how fucking relevant my position on these things is. Because I've been that person. Okay. Not far to go, really, not far to go. Violence, abuse and neglect in the Aboriginal communities. New South Wales Health recognises the impact of racism, colonisation and oppression on Aboriginal women, children, young people and their families, caregivers and communities, and the injustices Aboriginal people and workers face in using or working in government and non-government mainstream services. Right. Did anyone notice the missing people? Does anyone think Aboriginal men don't have issues? None at all. None to the point of being counted out of this ass-kissing. Sorry, that's virtue signalling, isn't it? No, it's fucking ass-kissing. I don't accept these things are to blame. I do not accept that there are massive amounts of racist colonisation and oppression happening to the Aboriginal people of today. Go fuck yourselves. I have known educated, intelligent Aboriginal people. I've known those who prefer to take handouts, those who take advantage of the education, and those who take advantage of their own education and intelligence to get the very best handouts they can get. I've even met people who claimed it isn't in my culture. I have met these persons firsthand. I had a woman brag to me that when she had to hand in her university assignments and she couldn't get them in on time, she'd just say it isn't in my culture and get fucking leave on it. Sometimes she said she didn't even hand in things and she'd get a pass mark on them because she pulled the blackfella card. My culture. Whenever it fucking suits. I do not accept that Aboriginal people are different from any other based on historical events or on the colour of their skin. I will accept differences where poverty, location, education and a lack of access to services makes the difference. There is no reason for an Aboriginal person in, say, Melbourne or Sydney to not get the same or better based on the assistance programs and funds available out of life than any other person. Given that I live in outback Australia and have seen people from the worst situations work their way up just to get out of the towns that I have lived in, I think there is little reason for Aboriginal people to not do the same. And I know Aboriginal people in these communities that do that. It is not outside their ability. But then I do not believe them to be an inferior race or incapable of learning. Who are the real racists? Me or those who seem to believe we white people need to look after the poor black people? I even believe they can survive without us should they need to. So all of the rest of this blaming white people for everything is absolute defeatist and racist bullshit. And I will stand by that. And I have known many Aboriginal people who have said the same to me. This is not an opinion that I just created on my own. This is an opinion that I've created and built on in conversation with actual Aboriginal people. Alright, this is this point. Despite these abuses, Aboriginal people and communities remain resilient and deeply connected to their culture, kinship, family and history. Abuse my bum. This came after making a case for the government and white society being abusers. I'll just skip back a tad. This bit here that I didn't cover is basically making the case for everyone else is to blame. So abuse my bum. This came after making a case for government and white society being the abusers. It's just a way we ignore the fact that this is a black on black violence issue. It may be, but it is someone else's fault. As to deeply connected, I can point this due to Aboriginal people who have been ostracised by their own tribal heads for having the wrong political positions. These connections are more a matter of convenience than caring, a matter of culture in the way my Chinese wife talks about duty to family. In both cases, this is corrupted by modern thinking. Culture and family are not enough, and they are not, less so when they're not adaptable to a new world. This is falling apart in China for the same reasons. In outback communities, elders complain about being beaten up by young people. Is this how you express resilience? Is this how you express kinship, respect, culture? You beat up the old people, you beat up the elders, or you simply deny certain people rights to be elders, which is what happened to at least one of my blackfellow mates. Okay, there's a lot more in there, but I'm not going over everything. Okay, these people emphasise that cultural competence is critical in approximately meeting the health and well-being needs of Aboriginal Australia, and that can only be effective in increasing the accessibility and safety of mainstream health services if this competency actively addresses the trauma and ongoing racism that Aboriginal people experience. Cultural competency can be defined as, and I didn't highlight it because I probably didn't give enough of a shit. I'm calling bullshit on this one just because it seems to assume trauma and ongoing racism are an issue. I will go over this again. The most racist thing anyone does to the Aboriginal people is assuming they are held back by other people and need other better people to help them out. You fucking people in your white guilt. You think you're so much better than them. When you assume trauma and ongoing racism, you also start with the assumption, an assumption provably wrong in today's Australia. No era before this has kissed, licked and crawled up the asses of any other people as hard as our nation suffering white guilt. At every level this shows. Even this government document needed to open by begging forgiveness for being in Australia to write the report. There are only two major forms of people dealing with Aboriginals in Australia today. The ones asking forgiveness and the ones who want Aboriginal people to succeed on their own terms. Without us begging and giving them everything and not fed on the... I'll read that as it's meant to be. Aboriginal people to succeed on their own terms without us begging and giving them everything and not fed on the social justice they've ingested. That's what I want. And that's what every Aboriginal person I have ever been seriously friends with has wanted, is Aboriginal people to stand on their own 2 feet. Unfortunately, we've destroyed them. And they're working to destroy themselves. There are enough people out there living on the dollar that is aimed at promoting this sort of document that they will happily throw every other Aboriginal under the bus to keep that pay packet coming in. Righto. Well, next page I skipped lots because it obviously didn't matter to me. It's just bullshit from honkies who know nothing. Aboriginal women, children and families disappropriately experience and are impacted by violent abuse and neglect. And it's everyone else's fault. They do it to... And it's everyone else's fault they do it to themselves. But again, note the missing people. I'll come back to the missing people. I really will. In 2016-17, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islands were 7 times more likely than non-Indigenous children to have received child protection services. Yes, okay. So we're looking after them. We're doing our best. Between 2012-13 and 2016-17, the rate of children receiving child protection services rose for Indigenous children from 126.9 to 164.3 per 1,000. Comments. So, do we think treating people like children and ignoring parts of the problem is working? Do we? It's gone up. It's pretty much come down across the rest of society. But it's gone up in the Aboriginal community because treating people like fucking children doesn't serve. Alright, I'm going to skip the rest of this. So go down to the next one. Sexual assault of Aboriginal children is widespread and underreported, according to the Aboriginal Child Sexual Assault Task Force. You mean there is something underreported that we can talk about? If it was underreported, how did you find out the extent? Just out of interest. It's widespread, apparently. Widespread. They know this because no one reported it. Oh, fuck's sake. Okay, I skipped all the... Oh no, I've written a note right down the bottom here about the entire section. So let's see what it says, shall we? I said I would return to the people never mentioned. Here's why. Not a single instance is in this entire section on Aboriginal people mentioned Aboriginal men. Not one. Not even as perpetrators. In the rest of the documents, they were very happy to point out that men were perpetrators. But in the Indigenous section, not fucking once. Maybe there's an issue. Maybe they're not the perpetrators. I spent informative years and years in adulthood around Aboriginal people. I had best mates who were Aboriginal. I'm an entertainer and have entertained in Aboriginal communities. I've done workshops with kids in Aboriginal communities. I know Aboriginal women are rough as rough gets, old and young. They are as susceptible to drugs, alcohol, and as other members in the community, and they can be extremely violent. The only place in Australia behaviour changing programs have been run for women is in an Aboriginal community in Northern Australia. How serious does it have to be for feminists to run a course meant to change men from the violent monsters they are to the loving things women are meant to be, for them to make a behaviour changing program for women? On television, we have advertising aimed at telling Aboriginal women, and it is specifically women, to go home and care for their kids. Make sure they're okay. Not out causing trouble. And for fuck's sake, feed them. Then we got the glaucoma. Make your kids wash their faces with soap and water. And all the other fucking... I swear, I have never seen anyone infantilized in the same way as advertising at Aboriginal people does. It treats them like they are fucking children. I find it so annoying. I'm not Aboriginal, but I cannot believe we treat other adults as children in that way. In fact, I think these are largely things created by their own communities. They treat them like fucking children. It's just staggering how bad it is. Anyway, for all of that, not once were men mentioned, and not once was it mentioned that the world seems to know Aboriginal women are the problem in their own communities. and that the people they violate are as likely to be men as children. At every point possible when not focusing on children, the attempt was made to make this sound like it was about women, female victims only. No discussion of even who perpetrates the crimes. Okay, gender diversity and vulnerability. Priority populations. Title correction. The social justice narrative that will direct who we give a fuck about. That's how that stands. I will repeat that. The title correction for 2.6 is the social justice narrative that will direct who we give a fuck about. Priority population groups. Aboriginal people, top of the list. Children, young women and girls, women in pregnancy and early motherhood, people with disability or mental illness, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex people, culturally and linguistically diverse people, migrants and refugees, people living in rural and remote areas, older women. Comment, please. The message being, we prioritise men right out of New South Wales health systems. If they can do it for domestic violence while being represented in every area of abuse, then where else are they doing it? The problem we have with priorities should be recognised right away by anyone who has the ability to read. When you prioritise, you effectively tell your staff not to spend any time caring about the people who fall outside the list. These people are not important. These people do not suffer from this problem. These people do not need our care. And nowhere in that list does it say men or boys, even though they are represented in absolutely every fucking area. We had young women and girls, no problem. We even had a range of sexualities and disorders, queer and intersex. But we couldn't fucking fit men in. Fuck, linguistically and culturally diverse migrants and refugees, but not fucking men. Got to sort out other countries' problems. Can't talk about men though. Okay, research strongly reflects that domestic and family violence and sexual assault are gendered crimes disproportionately experienced by and impacted on the health and well-being of women and girls and are overwhelmingly perpetrated by men. Comment, please. Domestic violence is not gendered. By gendering it is to allow it to continue in its generational form. The gendering is a feminist doctrine-driven concept forced on to reality. In the 1960s, Erin Pizzey, and I'm sorry if I spelt your name wrong, Erin, who founded the women's shelter movement, noted most violence was reciprocal and that it was generational, not gendered. Saying so cost her the shelter she paid for, as the feminists drove her out of the movement. Violent, abusive and neglectful mothers teaching sons and daughters in households where men go to work and don't spend the same time raising children, or in the more female-dominated single-parent homes, could be an issue. This is measured out in the crime statistics, showing children from single-parent homes are more likely to fail in life and be represented in the criminal justice system. You can't blame men when men are not in the picture. You have to limit access. You have limited access to the picture, or have limited access to the picture. Sorry about that. The gender narrative has been shown to be a false one and only serves to hide the problem which, if dealt with, could actually have an impact. In all the years, and with all the millions of dollars fed into the current system, little has changed. In fact, it's gotten worse with the Indigenous community. Sorry, I just lost where I was reading. I should use this mouse thing, shouldn't I? With all the millions of dollars, maybe it's time to try something new. The truth. The presentation of crime statistics in this way only tells us who currently goes down on the record as having committed the crimes. It says nothing about the facts that only 5% of people commit crimes and how it is they come to that point in their lives. Because something in their upbringing, something about their nature, made them this way. And we can't just keep blaming men. Okay, it seems I went on. Oh no, I've left a comment here on the page number. Yeah, no, this is where I gave up. I'm halfway through this document. It just isn't worth going on at this point. The fact that they finally, without reserve, made it clear that their position was not based on an informed one, but on feminist theory, it was time to pull out. New South Wales Health. I knew you were a piece of shit the day you removed all your content from the male victims page on the website. I didn't expect better reading one of your research documents. And that's where I'm going to end this video. As you can see, New South Wales is a feminist health is a New South Wales Health is a feminist run piece of fucking shit. How you can write a report like this and tell people you give a flying fuck about humanity and helping people, I just do not fucking understand. Alright, I'm out of here. I've been the anti-theocrat. This has been a piece of shit from the New South Wales Department of Health. And I'll see you in the next one. May your gods remain fictional.